What is going on, Hot Take Nation? It is David Ramsdenwood here for another episode of the Hot Take of the Day podcast. And today I am joined by Adam Kaat. Adam, how are you?
Doing great, brother. How are you?
I'm doing great. Now, this is a great story. For those who've been following on the LinkedIn and on the blog, you know that I have been driving Uber. Now, in the weird small world, Adam was a passenger in my, and this is the first time I've seen his face because obviously masks, and he was sitting behind me. But it turned out that Adam had already been doing a project similar to the current work of Jobs in America that I am working on. And Adam is joining us to talk about his book, his blog, and his frontline seat to the pandemic from a grocery store. Adam, talk to me. Give me a little background on yourself and what you're doing and what it was like to be in an Uber ride with me.
Well, yeah, it was interesting. It was pretty crazy to oh man, we had a lot of stuff in common. And it was even a really short ride too, and glad we got to connect on this for sure. Well, I could go all the way back to 2019. I became kind of disenchanted with corporate life. I was in a bad situation, and so I decided to quit my job and work on a novel that I had been wanting to write for a long time. And I did that for about 4 months, but then I needed money at the beginning of 2020. And so I started working at Whole Foods in Cherry Creek, Colorado, and it was just a cashier. I thought it'd be fun, just to, bullshit with people. Oh, can I swear on here?
Oh, you can swear all you want.
Okay. So yeah, I was just bullshitting with people and using my gift to gab. And then I'm 2 months into working there, the pandemic hit and everything changed. Went from fun to anxiety ridden, low paying shit that you had to go through every day. So I started to blog about it pretty much right away. And I kind of have a history of, I ran a beer blog called the Denver Hopper for 2.5 years or so.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of experience in doing that sort of stuff. And then, so I was able to get one up and running pretty quick called lifeonthegroceryline.com. And yeah, it took off. It got its own, people really wanted to hear what was going on from cashiers at a very early time in the pandemic. We were the only ones working, all of a sudden you have to go from just a kind of easygoing job to where you're still getting yelled at, but it's chill. And now you have to wear masks and you have to clean everything, and you're everyone's therapist. A lot of crying people, and everyone's breaking down, and society is falling all around you. And so yeah, I wrote that for a while, and I haven't posted anything on it recently, but I ended up turning a lot of those stories into a fictional novel, historical fiction of what I went through, along with other stories from people. And I just published that book in April of this year. It's my first novel, and I'm so excited. It's
well, and so I want to talk about all that. And the first place I wanted to start. So these were all the reasons. So you're in the Uber, and similar to you, I was doing it to meet people and hear stories. And you and I talked about it. I mean, the number of minimum wage people that I drive to and from work. And in my mind, I'm going I remember I picked up an 18-year-old kid who just moved out of his parents' house. He was working at the Castle Rock outlet stores, but he was living in Parker. And so the ride to and from was $30 an Uber, and he was making $13.50 an hour for an 8-hour shift. And I'm doing the math, and I'm I wanted to pull over, take him to lunch, and explain the economics of we drove by 14 real retailer stores and 30 restaurants, and net this was not a good commercial decision. And you were one of the people that I found really interesting because not only with the grocery, but you had left your corporate job. And I wanted to start there because a lot of oil and gas people have been going through that. We've been having downsizing, we've been having layoffs. A lot of people are now working in a much more stressful situation. They're being asked to do way more than they used to. They're worried about their job, they're worried about their income, they're worried about their health care, and they may have to pivot. And so you didn't like your corporate job. Broadly, you don't need to name the company, but broadly speaking, what were you doing? And what was the breaking point for you that said, you know what, I need to change and I'm going to pursue the passion that I have, which is writing?
Um, so I was a retail allocator, so working on just the supply side of a big retail company, and specifically, it was the manager that I had was really toxic. She was like berate people in meetings and things like that, and it was not a great environment. And I was like, well, I don't really deserve to be here, even like I need to be here as much. I have a little bit of savings. I have a 401k that I'm going to be working until I'm old anyway, so it doesn't. Um, was able to cash that out and kind of jumped when I could. Um, but yeah, it was the long string of not really pursuing what I wanted to do. And I've actually I've slipped back into like a corporate idea, but I have the marketing for the book. I have all these other things that I'm working on. Like I have that other channel of energy that isn't, my cubicle doesn't define me, or just that day in day out grind where I didn't feel like I was doing anything creative.
So let's compare, because you had mentioned at Whole Foods, which for those who don't know is wholly owned by Amazon, the world's largest company. And we actually just recorded an episode on the AWS, just in terms of what data is and data migration. And it's a fascinating story, but also Amazon bought Whole Foods and moved in, changed the whole thing. When you were getting berated by managers at Whole Foods, or managed, and you were being managed the way you were in a corporate job, which was, were they similar, worse? Did you feel more disrespected, less disrespected? How did you feel if you were to compare and contrast the management style from a corporate job and the retail front facing client job that you had at Whole Foods?
Um, so I would say that like her specific management style, this one woman from the corporate world, she was just the micromanaging, and it was like, not really being helpful when you needed it to be. In the retail world, it's kind of a like, at least that store in particular is super busy, so it's pretty like high, everything's moving, but I never felt like I never felt nearly as much pressure. Maybe that's because I walked into it with a whole lot less pressure on myself too. So I was just like, well, this is an in between. This is for the in between times, and I didn't mean to get stuck there. Like I would have probably, I'd come to at the end of 2019. I have another draft for a different novel that I wrote. So I was like, okay, well, I can do a physical job that's not mentally draining, and work on editing and growing this book that into something, and like all the marketing and stuff that I would need to do. The writing ended up being more of a release for the different book.
Yeah.
So it's you definitely feel like I felt underappreciated when I moved up to a supervisor later on in the year.
Now, are you still there? Just for clarity.
No.
Okay, so you have left now. The book is published. Okay, that's because and part of the reason, and you and I talked about this in the Uber, was part of the thought around my jobs in America, and this is the working title, so please don't someone steal it. But it's jobs in America, how trillion-dollar companies are building their business on the back of minimum wage workers. And
Yeah.
my observation from Uber, now, first of all, Uber's never been profitable as a company. Secondly, that to get like the surge pricing is really for Uber. We get a little surge, but it's like $3, $4, $5, $9. It isn't
Right.
like, the doubles and triples that you get. And you're generally paid just hours and back out. And then you're eating the gas and you're eating the tires. And I chipped my windshield, which was, unfortunately, it's an Audi, so it's $2,000 to fix. But yeah, it wasn't super. Driving an A8 as an Uber X driver wasn't the most commercial. But Uber takes all the benefit. And what I was curious about, if I were to go work at Whole Foods, which is still on my list, is
Mm-hmm.
can people who are from the corporate world and are the non-minimum wage, like high performers, they have backgrounds, they're writers or whatever, do you get noticed and promoted? And so it sounds like you did, in the 14 months or so you were there, you did get noticed and promoted to a supervisory job. That's so the American dream is intact, yes?
Like, yeah, I think it's not hard to get noticed. For me, like I'm like really all about. I knew the moment I needed to make more money eventually. Like I'm gonna stay here, be stuck here. I need to make a little bit more. So I immediately was talking to my manager at Whole Foods about how I'm interested in moving up or into a different part of the company. like, and just showing up to work was a big thing. I know it's like so at the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of, they gave us a very flexible, like, I guess PTO, or you could call in as much as you needed to, essentially, which, left the rest of your, I understand everyone's going through a lot of stuff, but you're also, like, people are left hanging. So if you can show that you don't, you'll show up to work and you work real hard, you don't complain. That, for me, it was like a no brainer. Like, it was really easy for me to move up.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's that way for everyone. I just kind of had that, move, like, climbing the ladder mentality if I could.
Well, I mean, I think, and you addressed it. Like, you talked to you communicated your desires to your manager, and then you performed, and then they have a choice to either reward that behavior or not. Now, we're going to go back to the book you wrote eventually, but I do want to follow this thread a little bit. So the pandemic starts. They're being very flexible, and clear. You get to know your coworkers, and so
Yeah.
what do you think about this perception that minimum wage workers are it's a transition. It's, you're between jobs, you're between this, you're just working it, it's not a big deal. Were there people that have been there for 20 years in the same role that you had been in versus wanting to progress? What's the churn like? What are the people that you encountered like? And what would be your takeaways and your stories of the employees that work at Whole Foods that maybe is something that would surprise listeners?
I think a lot of people that I met, they wanted to be able to do the other thing that makes them happy. Like, I met a lot of artists, that one that works really close, a great guy named Ben. He's a sculptor. It's like, it affords you that time and the mental space. Like, at least it should. Like, I mean, you just go to work, you're physically exhausted every night, but not as much mentally exhausted. And I rarely until later on, like, took anything home with me, like, mentally, just, like, thinking about work. Like, I didn't think about work. I just went home and, like, started writing, and I got sunk right into it. And um, I met a lot of artists. I met some really awesome, really interesting characters, like the people that have been working there for 20 years, like the groceries. That's their career, essentially. A lot of hardworking, really awesome people, funny, like, kind of forgotten. That's kind of part of the thing I wanted to showcase a lot in my book, is that this is a forgotten group in society that, I mean, you need them to get everything organized at a store. Like, it's not going to happen without those people. So um, I met a lot of, and a lot of young people too that are just getting into something, like they're in college. I met a lot of college kids.
Yeah.
But
It's fascinating to see that, because that, I would say, is generally not society's impression of who's working at Whole Foods.
right.
And so we're going to separate the pandemic, and we're going to talk a little bit more about customers, because I think that's interesting. But one of the things I always thought about, going right back to the pandemic, is society was generally okay with minimum wage frontline workers being deemed essential and having to be there.
Yeah.
And we expect it because, I mean, and I read a wonderful book recently that's called Animal Vegetable Miracle, and it's about food growing and cultivation. And this family moved from Tucson, Arizona, under the premise there's just not a lot of water in the desert and you can't really grow anything. And they went to their farm in Pennsylvania that they'd owned in the family, and they started growing all their food. And I mean, without the society would shut down if the truck stopped bringing food from the farms and people
Right.
weren't picking on the farms and then going to Whole Foods. And we were 100% happy to just erect some plastic hangy things in front of people and be like, get your ass to work. And yet teachers were like, oh, I'm endangered. I can't be anywhere near kids who are sick with the flu all the time, go to school because their parents have to work, are throwing up, coughing, touching, running, jumping. And all of a
Right.
sudden it was too dangerous for teachers, and the unions were able to have them not work. And in Denver, we didn't even open DPS again because they couldn't get enough teachers to go in person. But society totally let everyone, that the forgotten class, they better be there to pick things up. Did you feel that? Do you think that? What do you, again, I don't want you to offend all your teacher readers who are going to put the book as mandatory reading in their classes, but it was an interesting juxtaposition to me.
Yeah. I know. Okay, for me personally, that's best I could speak from, the going to work. was just like I got into the zone where I didn't really like, I don't know, I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't really like after a while it just kind of wore on you and you had to like put your head above it. Otherwise you'd sit there like paranoid behind your plexiglass, and everyone's kind of going out of their mind collectively all at the same time. It I hated being like called a hero, and the idea of being essential seems silly, like in a just a general sense. Like I mean, work is essential in general for the economy. So it's like I've never felt special, and even I know police officer friends and nurses and stuff. They don't look at themselves as heroes. It's just their job. Like that's what you signed up for. So we were in a weird spot where we weren't heroes before, but we are for like maybe like 2 months or something, and then all of a sudden it's just back to normal. And
Right.
I call them Lindas in the book, just like telling you that like they berate you or whatever they do, like the normal customer service things you have to deal with.
Yeah.
So like I never really embraced that. I kind of like pushed against it the whole time, and a lot of people I know did too. I felt kind of, I don't know, annoyed that someone would like care about what I'm doing for 2 months and then move on with their life. Seemed fleeting. And
right. There was a lot of virtue signaling, because I also remember like the mask mandate really didn't come in until June, July, as I recall. You probably recall better because you were seeing it, but I mean, there was a good portion of time, like the grocery stores had to be open because people needed to eat. And whether you were reducing capacity to 25% or whatever, the same number of people had to go through there and buy their things. And there wasn't, as I recall, social distancing. There wasn't, as I recall, a mask mandate for a while. But that's when, as you said, you were being called heroes. Did your coworkers, did any of your coworkers fall sick?
did they what?
Did they catch COVID from customers?
There was plenty of COVID outs for sure. Like even if you were exposed, yeah, it was they were really liberal about that. Like we got paid for like 2 weeks. They give you 2 weeks off.
So if you were exposed and you were off, you got paid.
Yeah, if you even thought you were sick, basically you got 2 weeks off.
But there must have been people gaming that system.
Yeah, I mean there has to be. I know that like I don't know anyone that did. I know a few people that got it. I don't know where they don't know where they got it. It's like I mean I felt like we had a lot of precautions in place, but I didn't really know at the time like if this was enough for what we were doing. I don't know. I just like I couldn't let it consume me.
Yeah.
So that's where I dove into the writing. I'm like telling my weird stories, and people are like gravitating towards me. How I don't know. One lady she licked her hand and slapped the table. And like she freaked out on me because I said I couldn't double bag her bags. So we kept on having different rules. Like we were running out of bags, so you couldn't double bag your bags. And then I'd have to make everyone wait, and we'd have to wipe down everything on the conveyor belt and on the card machine and everything, like between each person. So every person takes an extra 2 minutes or something.
Right.
And when you're talking about hundreds to maybe even 1,000 people, that's a lot. I dove into those kind of stories to kind of sift through how surreal it all felt.
So let's talk.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask one more question about that, and then I want to talk about the initial book that you wrote and how that pivoted into what became your project and then some of your stories. But when I hear you telling this story, and I think a lot of people again forget this. So Whole Foods, we used to call it Whole Paycheck before Amazon bought it, and obviously a lot changed with the store when Amazon bought it, because they have so much power to buy, and B, just generally, I think I wouldn't say it's now more like it's not what it was. So it's cheaper. It's not quite as organic, at least in my view. But Amazon benefits when people don't purchase in person, because they've built this huge architecture for online delivery, online trucks, online orders, online. And so from a brick and mortar standpoint, Amazon actually benefits by putting in rules at their stores that make the customer experience awful. We can't double bag. We have to wipe everything down. 25% in the store. Mask, no mask. Wait in line. Don't wait in line. Can only buy 3 tomatoes. So, whatever it is, because where does the person go? They buy online. And we know Amazon stock doubled over the course of time. We know that Amazon took a much larger position in everything they did, but they also owned the grocer that was pushing people online. Did you feel that at all in terms of the decision making and management, or was it just truly so confusing that you wouldn't relate one to the other? Because I often believe that the big companies, Facebook benefited, Google benefited, Amazon benefited, Apple benefited. All these people benefited from online activity, and they're the ones censoring the narrative, terrifying everyone. Wear the mask, screen, you're all going to die, because they benefited financially by you being scared.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. So when, like, as a cashier, I didn't notice it when I moved into. So I went into their prepared foods area. So like, yeah, all their packaged out goods and basically their in-house restaurant is kind of what it is.
Yeah.
I noticed the weight of Amazon more there, where you're taking something that needs to be pretty customizable, like it's a restaurant, that they're trying to put a corporate stamp, like a huge stamp on it, and make everything regimented, and cut labor all the time, cut costs. It was almost impossible to get good hours for most of the time as a cashier, even. But like, I had to move up to supervisor in a rough role just to get full time. So, and then I get benefits and things like that. But yeah, I guess I can see that. I could see that we had this it was like a heat gun or heat camera that you'd walk in when you went into work. And for a while there, everything was like sanitized and everyone was real serious. But I mean, the heat gun always was wrong. It always was. It just takes your surface temperature. If I was riding my bike, I was colder. It's like 70 degrees. So there was like this, they did kind of feed off of fear in a way, I think. I think, yeah, that's an interesting observation. And yeah, I could see that now.
Well, and I mean, again, there was an expose from a CNN producer who said, we found our ratings went up when we put the death total on the screen. And so again, look, and this is where I think people who talk about coronavirus, like myself, I'm just being like transparent around, you might not cause the situation. Like I would say, and again, this is not a conspiracy theory show, I would say that the Wuhan lab was probably experimenting with stuff. We have heard that there were employees who got sick and exposed to things and that they left. We also know that China shut down domestic flights before they shut down international flights. We also know that China and the US were in a trade war, and that the US was retaliating with tariffs and China was trying to win. So if those were the situations presented to me in battle, I didn't create them, but let's just say they exist, I am going to take the most advantage of that to get the outcome that I want. And so every company that is a for-profit business, every country in the world looks at the stimulus that's put in front of them, and then they make the decision that is best for their profitability, stakeholders, whatever. So I found it interesting. Let's go to your first book. What was your first book about that hasn't been published yet? And are you going to publish it?
There's maybe a thought that it could, like, something feeds into it down the road, but it's pretty much shelved for good at this point. So it followed same character. Daniel is the main character in Life on the Grocery Line. But it was Daniel wakes up. It's kind of like a Fight Club kind of story, and that's probably why I won't publish it, because it feels a little bit too derivative. So I like some of the characters and the ideas of it. So he wakes up one day, and there's a guy in a panda costume that's like in his living room, and he's in his living room, and it's him, but he's in a panda costume. So it's like a mirror image, almost like like Fight Club, I guess you'd say. But then he takes him on a journey through his life, and the thing is Daniel's been miserable the whole time, and he's created an online persona, so an influencer. Frankie is his name. It's the name of the panda.
Yeah.
And he's an online influencer where Daniel's been living it, like, without knowing it. So in the end, he has to decide if he's going to wear the panda costume and become Frankie, or do his normal life and go back to his cubicle. So it's definitely me working through my like miserable corporate experience too.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
It's like so obvious now that it like smacks me in the face. But I think that the impetus to get like Daniel away from that and like, but in a more subtle way, like he is in Life on the Grocery Line, he's more subtly miserable, but trying to figure it all out and trapped in the pandemic at the same time.
It's fat. The process of writing. Obviously, I read a blog. I've written a book, and a lot of people ask like, what's it like to be a writer, an author? What's the inspiration? And you're totally right. You have something you're trying to work through. For me, when I wrote "What the fuck is wrong with everybody else? What they didn't teach you in business school," I was working through having been fired and having spent my entire first 12 years of my life focused only on my career. That was all I cared about. That's all I progressed. Everything was transactional, and I wanted to be like the Tiger Woods of oil and gas. And all of a sudden, one day you're fired and you go from 50 phone calls, 50 vendor meetings, 50 lunches, 50 dinners, 300 emails a day, all this responsibility. And you end up on the couch with your family who you haven't seen in years and have totally ignored. And it's like, oh, here I am. Nice to meet you again, children. What are your names again? How old are you? And so the book was really me working through that process and kind of coming out the other side. And it sounds like you had a very similar experience in terms of the personas. Now, if you think about online presence and social media now, there's a lot of anonymous accounts on Twitter. And some of these anonymous accounts become very big, famous influencers. They must be living that Daniel Franke life where,
Right.
they're cubicle bound on one hand, and on the other hand, they have this big aura. Do you think much about that?
Yeah, I mean, you see the anonymity everywhere, and it like so the blog when I put it on Facebook and it's got like 15,000 followers, so it gained a really big presence. And I mean, so many people would troll it. It got big enough that people trolled it all the time, and they still do occasionally if I post certain things. And um, it's it is sad because like that comes from a place it's not healthy to like just go outwardly insult someone that you don't even know. And like, I mean, even for a book, like I
Right.
had some people say awful stuff for the things it published. It's a fake pandemic or whatever. And I was like, why don't you read the book and realize that that's not even what I'm talking about? So,
Right. Yeah. That's not the play. I mean, whether it's a fake pandemic or not, you were working while the world was shut and you were telling
exactly.
stories about it. That's,
Yes.
it's interesting. How did
It's
you
real.
manage roles? Like, how did you develop? Are you better at it now? I know it took me a couple of years before, and I'm still not great at it, but I'm a lot better than I used to be. How did you manage the trolls and the negativity? And you put yourself out there with a book, and negative
Yeah.
feedback hurts because it is you. So
Right.
how do you cope with that?
Like I kind of take solace in the really nice people that like say really nice things. Like I had someone comment early on that it's like you're speaking for us, and I felt like that was pretty amazing. I'd never had someone say such a nice thing about like I was speaking for the forgotten person, and that really touched me, and that made me like think like the way I approached the book. I hope that people get are are better because of it. Like they think about like the way they treat grocery store employees afterwards. Most of the time, I try to laugh off all sorts of stuff like that, but
Yeah.
it still does get to you because you're like, people are just, I mean, they're ruthless when they can't be. When they don't have any responsibility, there's no recourse. Like I'm super like sweetheart of a person, but like if you saw me in person, I'm like 6'3" and like 240 or whatever. Like probably they're not gonna like come up to me and
Right,
say
on the
something.
street, randomly on the street, they're not saying anything to you, but in Amazon, some 27-year-old, dude is feeling super comfortable berating you because they had a bad day. Let's talk about some of those customer stories that you saw and some of the things you wrote about in the book or other stories that didn't make the book. It sounds like you really like the employees. It's a different thing than just minimum wage. It's sort of people who are doing other things and need mind share for that. What about the
Mhm.
customers?
I so the clientele at that particular Whole Foods in general is kind of it's organic, um, maybe more it's more expensive. Whole paycheck is definitely accurate because it's really expensive especially if you go like their meat and stuff. But I man, like a lot of the interactions I had was kind of this disconnect with like where they were, especially because a lot of it I'm focused on with the pandemic, that you know they just put all their emotions on me, and like all the things they're going through when their kids can't go to school, so now they have to be at home with their kids and their husband, and they like you can just see it on them, or I could feel it on them that they haven't, like what you said earlier, you haven't like spent any time with them in a long time. And excuse me, and it's it wore on them. You could see it, like just the stress in their face and their eyes, and like these are people that are still like having $500 worth of expensive groceries, like, and it's not even well spent groceries. Like you saw a lot of produce and stuff. Like, why are you buying this when you have to be going to lockdown? Yeah, it's kind of it's that disconnect between like that I'm not even, almost not even a human, even though they're treating me like I'm a therapist. A lot of those stories that I share in there are derived from that. The one in particular was a lady that I remember she got like snow crab or king crab legs. So she got like $250 worth of king crab legs, and asked her what the special occasion was for, and she said, "Oh, our son was like graduating 7th grade or something like that." Like some obscure, that's not even a thing to celebrate, frankly.
Right.
And she said, "I remember when we were kids, we only got snow crab legs." And I just kind of sat there and was like, "You got crab legs as a kid, and like now you're giving them king crab legs, but not snow." I'm like, the disconnect there is
Right.
just. I mean, I make $15 an hour. I don't even know what you're talking about. This would be my half my paycheck to buy this stuff.
Right.
And just the flightiness of it all, people don't really understand. And they don't want to.
It is interesting how different people at different income levels experience the pandemic differently. And that, again, wrapping it up with that story I told about the young man that I drove that was working a 13.50 an hour job for 8 hour shift, and it cost him $60 to get to and from work. And it didn't seem to dawn on him to work closer where he could walk and save the money. And then conversely, you have people who, in a pandemic are getting king crab legs for grade 7. I remember my parents, I asked if they were going to come to my high school graduation. They said, "We might come to your graduation of your master's degree." And I was like grade 11 at the time. But like everything between now and then is just not really that important. And no, we don't celebrate those kinds of things. Like we don't celebrate the expectation of your life. And so,
Yeah.
which again, everyone is raised in different circumstances in different environments. And I can't remember one of my favorite Uber stories, and I can't remember if it was the day that you and I met. It may have been, but there was an investment banker in town from back east, and I picked him up, and he sits in the back of the car, and he goes, "This is a nice car." I said, "Oh, thanks. I really appreciate that." And he goes, "Mine's nicer." And I was like, and so with no context, I sort of get this story. And so now, me being me, I of course go, are you dressing down an Uber X driver that your car is nicer than my car? This is how you're starting our interaction. And he's like, "Oh, why? What do you mean? I drive an R8." I'm like, "Cool." And then we had a conversation that sort of evolved from there. But I thought it was a really interesting, like, big dick move to like big dick an Uber driver. Now, and there's nothing wrong with an Uber driver. It seems like if you're gonna big dick someone, I was probably not the person that day that you should be big dicking. But anyway, it's customers are very interesting.
Yeah, they don't empathize easily, especially in an environment like that. And you most of the time you're just seeing them. I don't know. Just for a minute or two, they're only getting a small amount of stuff. Some people you see a few times a week, which is kind of crazy at Whole Foods that you can go there 3 or 4 times a week and afford to do that. But like I remember one guy, he was a brain surgeon, and he always came through with a big like $600 worth of groceries, and this was farther on after people weren't hoarding and stockpiling on everything. And so I asked him how many kids he had. He had 7 kids, and he took a genuine interest in my life. Like we talked about things. We talked about I was like writing a blog and working on a book, and he was so like really impressed with that, and he like leaned into it, and like I saw him weekly for a few months, and he's just a really nice guy, like bringing himself to like my place, and like I'm, as a brain surgeon, and it's a pretty incredible job that it made me feel much better about where I was in life.
Right.
When like he can take an interest in me when I'm like 30 in my 30s working as a cashier, because like I just couldn't do the shit that I was doing before. So I wanted to break the mold or break the thing that I was doing and go out and write a novel, do something more interesting with my life, or from my perspective. And he was the guy's been probably like at the head of his class since he was a kid, graduated top of his class, and like knew what he was wanted to do from the get-go. Right. It was like his goal. And I relay that story in there pretty explicitly. It's it's my favorite story in the book, and I fictionalize it and make it really internal about Daniel's struggle. But like if that's the lesson, I think, is like just be a better person. Like realize you're not. Yeah. You need a big fucking Uber driver. Like, oh my God, what are you trying to achieve there? Like, why even say that to yourself in your head?
Well, I love your learning there, because there is a balance, right? And so, obviously there's this backdrop of Juneteenth and systemic racism and opportunity and silver spoon and white privilege and all these things. All I ever think about is parents model behavior for kids. And if the parents are modeling a certain behavior, the kids are more likely than not to follow it. And additionally to that, we are in a society where we have to interact. And so I always say, and a lot of people who have listened to me for a long time, and they know they reach out to me on LinkedIn, I will take any coffee once. I will respond to people when they take the time to reach out. If I haven't responded to you, I deeply apologize. Please send me another note and I'll get back to you. Just because taking an interest in the human condition, I think is important. But I also say, as the book I haven't written yet, that's called Nobody Cares It's Your Birthday, is because at the end of the day, everyone really just focused on themselves, to be perfectly honest, and how they're going about their experience in life, and that they don't really care how you're doing. Now, again, that's why I'm saying it's a balance. They care, but they also care about their mortgage, and they care about their kids, and they care about their retirement, and they care about their boat, and they care about all the things. And so I remember once I told where this came from is my 11-year-old at the time. We were going to dinner and he was bouncing on my hand. He said, "Dad, are you excited about my birthday?" I said, "Andrew, it's February 11th. He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Your birthday's March 28th. He's like, "Yeah." So I got down on my knee and I looked him right in the eye and I said, "Andrew, no one gives a fuck it's your birthday. I don't care it's your birthday. No one here cares it's your birthday. I care about what I was thinking about before you asked me the question about your birthday. And once this conversation is done, I'm going back to thinking about what I was thinking about, which is me. So learn that lesson." And I've told that lesson a lot. And people are like, "Oh my God, that's so harsh to tell a kid." But it has made him a lot more independent, and like he needs a lot less external gratification. So I'm curious, in all of that backdrop, the relationships versus individualism, interconnectivity, how do you see it all, and what was your big takeaway from Whole Foods in that context?
Well, here I'll mention something about the saying a hero, like people calling people a hero. Like to me, I thought of that as the whole time as it's definitely like made them feel good. It makes you feel like you're doing something by telling someone that they're valuable. And yeah, it made you feel not forgotten. But if you don't continue that throughout your life, and you didn't do it before, then either it's a learning lesson or you're like virtue signaling, or you're full of shit. It's like it's something you need to take with you. It's especially that, like, we had a whole year where, lockdowns and all sorts of stuff. Like you should really have grown as much as you can, like, and like learn to, empathize, but think critically, think all these different, like, learn as you go. And I working at Whole Foods was one of the best experiences of my life so far. Like the meeting the people, like the breakdown of like how I don't know, like I had to deal with this. But I got all the motivation to do something else with my life. Like I was in a draft form before, but now I took it from blog form. I grew an audience all the way to publishing a book for the first time, and it's pretty amazing to like hold this thing and like be like, And it feels so good, like to see something through, like and be part of it. I definitely learned a lot about myself, like being self-sufficient, staying at home all the time, scheduling out my time to write a book, not an easy thing. And then the editorial process of like just hating yourself for about 2 or 3 months, like oh my God, I have to look at this sentence again, and like the self-doubt that you defeat or you have to defeat to really get there. Yeah, the entire experience was it was maybe the best year of my life. And it sucks because a lot of people went through a lot of hard stuff, and I know, like, I was working with a lot of people that struggled too, but I ended up turning it on its head, and yeah, I'm pretty proud of that.
Well, I mean, I commend you for that. And building resilience, I think, is the number one character trait people need. And we can all look at a negative situation and we can turn it negative, or we can turn it around and be positive. And if we're not growing, we're dying. And I agree with you. I have loved doing the Uber driving. It's been very reflective, and I try and grow every time I do it. And it sounds like you had that. Tell us, last question. Tell us where the book's at, where people can buy it, how the process is going, and what that's like publishing your own book, doing your own marketing, full-time gig. You got speaking tours. What's going on with the book?
Well, it's available on Amazon.com, and it's life on the grocery line, a frontline experience in a global pandemic. And so it's on Barnes and Noble too. You can get a digital. You can follow me on Instagram at Kaat, Kaat, Adam. And I update from like here and there. And I have a feature or interview. I'm going to be in the Westward coming up here pretty soon.
Great.
You can get me at Tattered Cover. I got into Tattered Cover. I was really proud of that. Growing up as a kid in Colorado, and that's kind of the store. So like the marketing's, it's interesting because that's not the way my brain is wired. It's not really like always doing, marketing. But I found it like pretty cool to be like creative and try and get the word out there. And I've had such a good response from people, especially like service industry folks. They've loved the book, high praises. It's doing well, and I hope it can grow. And we'll maybe I can get an agent too here eventually. Do something like keep it going, because I think it's a really, I mean, I hate to do my horn like that, but like I feel like it's an important story. I feel like people need to not forget what we went through and think about how they treat others in this very strange life as we go forward, and it's been pretty amazing there, David, for sure.
Well, I think it's also it's a commendation to you, and that's where we started the interview. Was you were working a corporate job that you didn't love. You had a passion to do something else. You had a project that was your purpose at the time, and
Mm-hmm.
through the river that was your experience over the last 15 months, it morphed into something so much beyond what you expected. It changed the book, it changed your outlook, it changed your relationships, it changed your people, and here you are on the other side of the pandemic with a totally different career, a book that's out there that you've published yourself, and making great inroads into some of the major bookstores. So I commend you. I am so glad that you got in the back of my Uber, and
Yeah,
and
me too,
so
man.
I want all listeners, follow Adam, check out the book, check out the blog. It is a labor of love, and it's artists and writers and authors, etc., that are working at Whole Foods, making sure that we put food on the table. And it's nice to meet those stories. So Adam, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, David. I appreciate it, man.
Awesome. Until next time, if you like what you hear, we're back from a little vacation. If you have story ideas, interesting stories, whatever those are, please shoot me a note, write a review in the iTunes store, or wherever you listen to your podcast. And until next time, be safe, be good, have a great day, and bye for now.